All right, this will be part one of my double and half angle videos. So I have the half angle for cosine and sine up here. I will eventually do a tangent one. The half angle formulas, we can use them to find like cosine of 15, sine of 22.5, some of those other angles. But for example, cosine of 15 we can find with sum and difference. And I would choose sum and difference for speed. Well, not necessarily for speed, but for ease of cleanup. So that part would be speedier. But the 22.5 cannot be done by sum and difference. So we have to by half angle. So what these formulas allow us to do is find the exact values of some of these ugly angles that are not multiples of 30 or 45 that we can find with these triangles. Okay? So cosine of 15, again, I could have done 45 minus 30 or 60 minus 45 and did that formula and got an answer. It would look a lot different, this answer, but it'd be equivalent. So the formula starts us off with plus or minus. Well, cosine of 15 is in quadrant 1, positive. Then it says 1 plus cosine of alpha. Now it's called the half angle for a reason. This is the half angle of that. So whatever this is twice as much. So this would actually be cosine of 30 over 2. So since we know 30, we can find a half of 30, which is 15. So we can find all the halves of known angles, which is nice. So cosine of 30 is radical 3 over 2. And if you don't know, you can look at your triangle. The cleanup here, I would multiply the top, there's a big fraction here, the top by 2 and the bottom by 2. That's probably the best way to clean these up. Because if not, it gets a little ugly in cleanup. Then I could take the square root of the bottom. Square root of 4 is 2. It looks ugly, but that's an exact answer for cosine of 15. If you remember, when we did the sum difference, we got radical 6 plus radical 2 all over 4. You know, it's not the prettiest, but it looks a little nicer than this one. This has got a radical inside my radical. But this is how you can do it with half angle. So this is another equivalent value. A good thing for you guys to check your work, type in cosine of 15 in your calculator. You know, make sure you're in degree mode and you get a decimal. And then type this in. Make sure you type it in correctly. Use your fraction button. And you'll get the same answer. You know, and good verification. All right, sine of 22.5. Well, this formula, again, it's going to be positive because we're in quadrant 1, 22.5. 1 minus cosine of 45. So you notice the cosine formula had a plus and the sine formula has a minus for the cosine. But they're both cosine. Some people just not thinking will put sine there, but because, you know, cosine gives me cosine, but so does sine. Sine gives me cosine. All right, 45. All right, cosine of 45 is root 2 over 2. Again, I would multiply top and bottom by 2. And that would be sine of 22.5, an exact, okay? So they're pretty quick. You only have to find one thing. If you remember in the sum difference, you have to find 4 things. So that's a little quicker, but it's a little tougher in the cleanup. All right, you have to have your algebra skills down. All right, let's do a tangent. This is pretty much the formula. Remember, a tangent is sine over cosine. So if you took the sine over the cosine, flipped it over, you get this equation. But there are some better ones. We can actually multiply by the conjugate inside of 1 minus cosine and clean up. We get this. And it eliminates this plus or minus choice that I don't want to deal with. And eliminates the radical. So I would use this all day long. Or that. That's also if I had actually multiply by the conjugate of the top. We don't normally do that, but you multiply 1 plus cosine top and bottom, clean it up, you get this value. So I can show you all three. We can do, it can get really complicated. I don't want to complete it, but if I did, let's say, tangent of, let's do tangent of 105 degrees, something out of the quadrant 1. So, 105, I could do 60 plus 45 and do the sum and difference. Or I can do the half angle, because 105 is half of 210, and 210 is a multiple of 30. Because remember, you can use these triangles to find all multiples of 30 and 45. All right, so 105, I would not choose this way, but I'm going to start it for you at least. It would be negative, because we're in quadrant 2, 105 is in quadrant 2, tangent's negative in quadrant 2. So that's how you can determine the sign when you know this angle. All right, 1 minus cosine of alpha. So cosine of 210, excuse me. So you can see this one's already going to be annoying. So if we go to 210, remember 210 has a reference angle of 30. So again, 210, it's right down there. So you just do cosine of 30 degrees, which is root 3 over 2. 210's in quadrant 3. You got to remember that too. So cosine of 210 is cosine of 30, rack 3 over 2, but in quadrant 3. All right? So anytime you're finding a trig function angle, you always got to be thinking, where am I at? All right? So you can already tell this one's just going to be nasty. So I would multiply everything by 2. But it's still got some nastiness to it. So what we would end up having to do is kind of multiply by a conjugate in here. So this is why I don't choose this method, but I'll do a quick. So the top is 2 plus root 3 squared, but we have a square root. So it actually come out. The bottom will just be inside, it'll just be really nasty. So let's leave it all in for a second. So I could leave that as 2 plus root 3 squared, and then take square it later, or leave it in there for now, and then multiply this out, which is just the number 1. So I got 4 minus 3, do all that for 1. So since that's square that squared, I just get negative 2 plus root 3. So because the square root of that squared is just 2 plus root 3, but the minus signs can distribute through. All right? Man, that's an ugly, but actually cleaned up a little better than I thought it might. So now, but watch how fast this is. So if I use this formula, again, we're looking for 105, so this will be 210. So you got 1 minus cosine of 210 over sine of 210. Well, cosine of 210 we did was negative root 3 over 2. Sine of 30 is a half, so it's going to be negative a half. Again, we're in quadrant 3, so everything's negative for sine and cosine. All right, clean up, multiply everything by 2. Distribute the negative sign up. Got the same answer we got before. Much faster, much easier in the math. So I'm going to remind you, whenever there's a fraction, if I do the same to the top and bottom, we can. You guys have done this your whole life. Like 5/10 is 1/2 because you divided the top by 5 and the bottom by 5. You can divide, multiply, as long as you do one of those two to the top and bottom. All right. This one is the same values. Sine of 210, we already know, negative a half. So 1 plus cosine 210, get negative rack 3 over 2. Again, multiply by 2. So then that's when you're like, ooh, that looks a little different. But if I multiply by the conjugate, if you guys remember that, that negative sign will distribute. And the bottom, if you did FOIL and cleaned it up, you actually get 4 minus 3, which is 1. So I just got the same answer all 3 times. I don't have to do them all. Pick one. I would pick one of these two. I'd actually pick this one, because then I don't have to worry about a binomial and doing conjugate stuff. So to me, just because it has a single term on the bottom, I think it's easiest to clean up. All right, so this is my choice every single time. You know, I should say 97% of the time. So, all right. So that's video 1 for the half angles.